A cashier humiliated a homeless man. Then he pulled out a secret. A brittle wind swept through the streets of Greenbridge, rustling piles of crumpled leaves across sidewalks and into gutters. On a particularly cold afternoon, Adam McAllister made his way down Liberty Avenue, hands stuffed in the pockets of his threadbare coat. He wore the markers of a life lived in the margins: unkempt hair, patched-up pants, and boots that had seen far better days. Despite the dropping temperature, Adam showed no outward signs of huddling for warmth. He simply walked, his weary eyes scanning the familiar storefronts and faces with a sort of detached acceptance. Greenbridge was not a large city, more of a growing town, with rows of small businesses that gave the place a sense of local charm. On warmer days, children played along the wide sidewalks, while neighbors stopped to greet each other. But during the colder months, the energy dwindled. People rushed in and out of stores, shoulders hunched against the chill. If they acknowledged Adam at all, it was often with an averted gaze or a sympathetic half-smile they offered from a safe distance. Adam had grown used to it. Over the past few years, he'd come to know exactly how the world treated someone like him. Homelessness had not always been his story. Once, he'd had a steady job and an apartment not too far from downtown. He'd had a future he was proud of, or at least content with, until circumstances, some of his own making and some beyond his control, conspired to strip it all away. Job loss, medical bills, a devastating personal loss that left him emotionally hollow. There were plenty of reasons he ended up on the streets, but Adam no longer wasted breath explaining. He simply carried his past within him, worn close to his heart like an invisible bruise. The wind bit deeper that afternoon, and Adam's stomach growled. He'd skipped breakfast. He often skipped multiple meals. But he had a pocket full of change he'd meticulously counted the night before, enough for a modest lunch if he could find a place that wouldn't shoo him away. He had decided on Collier's Grocer, a neighborhood store that boasted fresh deli sandwiches and hot coffee near the back. The owners had changed hands a few times over the years, but it remained a place that sold no-frills groceries at decent prices. Adam hoped that if he kept his head down, grabbed his sandwich quickly, and paid without fuss, no one would bother him. He stepped through the automatic doors into a warm, bright interior. Rows of canned goods lined the front, with produce in open crates along one wall. Toward the rear, a sign that read "Hot Food" and "Deli" pointed the way to a small counter. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the sharp tang of onions. Adam felt his mouth water. Pulling his coat tighter, he navigated the aisles, careful not to brush too close to any other customers who might recoil at his appearance. He finally approached the deli area. A board overhead listed simple lunch combos: soup and bread, sandwiches with small sides. The prices were modest, but for someone in Adam's situation, every penny mattered. He double-checked the coins in his pocket. He had just enough for a small turkey sandwich and a small coffee, if taxes didn't push it over. Breathing out a small sigh, he decided to try. He hadn't tasted a fresh sandwich in weeks. Behind the counter stood Derek, a cashier in his mid-20s. He wore the store's standard polo shirt and name tag. Tall, with neatly styled hair and a hint of impatience in his stance, Derek tapped his fingers on the register as though time was perpetually slipping away from him. Adam watched him interact with a customer ahead, an older woman wearing a neat dress coat. Derek plastered on a courteous smile, completed her transaction swiftly, and sent her off with a "have a great day." But when Adam stepped forward, Derek's demeanor visibly changed. It was subtle at first, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a tightening around the mouth. Adam offered a polite nod, trying to keep his voice even and calm. "Hi, could I get a small turkey sandwich, please? Maybe a small coffee, too." Derek barely looked at him. He punched a few keys on the register. "That'll be $5.20 plus tax," he said flatly. Adam swallowed, counting out what he believed was enough: a handful of coins, mostly quarters and dimes, with a couple of nickels. His fingers were stiff from the cold, and he fumbled one coin, which clinked onto the floor. He stooped to pick it up, cheeks flushing as he sensed Derek's stare boring into him. Clearing his throat, Adam placed the small pile on the counter. Derek looked at the coins with open skepticism, then began to count them, slowly, as though expecting a discrepancy. When he finished, he arched an eyebrow. "You're short," he announced. His voice had taken on a louder pitch, meant for nearby customers to hear. "You don't have enough for the combo. And with tax, it's more than you think." Adam's heart sank. He had calculated it carefully. He'd even added an extra dime just in case. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "I counted. It should be enough if it's just the small sandwich and a small coffee." "Look, I'm not in the habit of giving out freebies," Derek snapped, sounding more put out by the second. He turned the register screen so Adam could see the total. It flashed $5.58 with tax. Adam had $5.50 in exact change. He was 8 cents short. Adam closed his eyes, exhaling slowly, trying to remain calm. "I'm sorry. Maybe if I skip the coffee and just get the sandwich." Before he could finish, Derek shook his head, locking eyes with him. "You shouldn't be in here if you can't pay," he said, his voice low and cold. Then, raising it for all to hear, he added, "We're running a business, not a charity." A hush fell on the few customers in the deli section. Some turned away, pretending not to notice, while others watched with a mixture of discomfort and pity. Adam felt the heat rising in his cheeks. He wanted to crawl into a hole, but he forced himself to stand upright. "I'm sorry," he repeated more softly. "Let me just get a smaller sandwich or whatever fits." "Oh, sure," Derek interrupted with mocking politeness. "Let's see how else we can cater to you for your convenience. Maybe we can cut the sandwich in half. Or do you want it in quarters? Or maybe scraps from the trash?" The cashier let out a sardonic chuckle that echoed in the now tense air. Adam's humiliation seared him. He heard a small gasp behind him, maybe from another customer, but no one stepped forward. He thought of Lily's face, a sweet girl he'd passed by in the store earlier who had watched him with innocent curiosity, and the older gentleman in a flannel jacket who had given Adam a nod in the produce aisle. None of them spoke up. 1,000 words roiled inside Adam's chest, but none reached his tongue. The sense of being singled out, shamed, and powerless left him frozen. "Fine," he said quietly. "I'll just leave." Derek shrugged, a faint smirk on his lips. "That's probably best," he said, before turning his attention to the next customer, a gesture that dismissed Adam's very existence. Adam picked up his meager coins, pocketed them, and backed away from a counter. He could feel a sting of tears threatening at the corners of his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He walked toward the exit, passing rows of neatly stacked cereal boxes and end caps with brightly colored sale signs. The store suddenly felt suffocating. A part of him wanted to lash out, to demand dignity. But what good would that do? He was 8 cents short, and the world knew it. That, apparently, was enough to brand him unworthy. When the automatic doors slid open, the cold air slapped him in the face. He stepped onto the sidewalk, taking in the rush of passing cars, the chatter of midday shoppers, and the faint hum of a bus pulling up at a stop down the block. His stomach growled again, a reminder of his continued hunger. But more than that, he felt the sting of Derek's words echoing in his mind. "We're not a charity, maybe scraps from the trash." Adam found a bench near the edge of the parking lot, partially sheltered from the wind by a barren tree. He sat down, head bowed, hands trembling. He hated how easily someone's scornful words could break him. The past 2 years had been a slow progression of losses, material, emotional, spiritual, and every instance of cruelty chipped away at what remained of his sense of self-worth. He didn't notice he was no longer alone until a gentle voice said, "Are you okay?" Startled, he looked up to find a woman with kind eyes and a gray knit hat standing nearby. She appeared to be in her late 40s, with faint lines of worry on her face. She wore a store name tag, Carla, assistant manager. Perhaps she'd followed him out. Forcing a weak smile, Adam shrugged. "I'm fine," he lied. Just needed some air. Carla's brow furrowed. I'm sorry about what happened in there, she said, voice low. I saw part of it. Derek can be rude sometimes. Adam didn't reply. He lowered his gaze to the ground, focusing on the cracks in the pavement. It was easier than meeting her sympathetic look. After a hesitant pause, Carla asked, Do you mind if I sit? When Adam nodded, she settled onto the bench, leaving a respectful space between them. We had a short staff meeting earlier today about treating all customers with respect. I'm sorry it didn't sink in. I don't want you to think we condone that behavior. Adam shrugged again. It's not your fault, he murmured. I shouldn't have tried to buy something I couldn't afford. That's not the point, Carla said firmly. Everyone deserves to be treated with decency. She studied him for a moment. What's your name? Adam, he answered. I'm Carla. She paused, as though gathering courage, and then asked, Would you let me buy you a sandwich? You must be hungry. He hesitated, pride and hunger wrestling within him. He thought of Derek's sneer, of how he'd been singled out. But Carla's sincere tone broke through his reluctance. Slowly he nodded. I'd really appreciate that, he said quietly. They rose from a bench, Carla leading him back into the store, this time through a side entrance near the storeroom to avoid the main aisles. They navigated a narrow corridor that opened into a small employee break area, adjacent to a secondary service counter. Carla instructed Adam to wait there. She returned a few minutes later with a neatly wrapped turkey sandwich and a hot coffee in a styrofoam cup. Here you go, she said, handing them over. Adam accepted the food with a trembling thank you. He could scarcely remember the last time someone had shown him such kindness. Carla gave him a gentle smile. If anyone asks, you're my guest, she said. Have a seat in the break area if you'd like. I'll be around. Adam nodded, though he felt self-conscious occupying the employee space. The sandwich's warmth radiated through the wrapper, making his stomach clench with anticipation. He found a small table against the wall and lowered himself onto a chair that squeaked in protest. Without further ceremony, he unwrapped the sandwich and began to eat, taking slow bites, relishing the fresh lettuce and tang of tomato. The coffee was strong and hot, filling him with a sense of physical relief, if not emotional ease. He was halfway through his meal when Derek's voice echoed from around the corner. Carla? Carla, where did you go? There was an edge of annoyance in his tone. Adam stiffened, glancing toward the corridor. He shrank in his seat, hoping Derek wouldn't spot him. But fate had other plans. Derek came into the break area, presumably searching for Carla, and froze at the sight of Adam calmly eating. His eyes widened with surprise and then narrowed in anger. What is he doing in here? Derek snapped, addressing no one in particular. This area is for employees. Adam swallowed. A fresh wave of shame threatened to drown him. Setting the half-eaten sandwich down, he rose from the chair, mentally preparing to leave. But before he could speak, Carla hurried into the room, having heard Derek's raised voice. He's my guest, Derek, she said calmly. I invited him in, got him something to eat. Derek let out a humorless laugh. We can't just let random drifters hang out in the employee lounge. What if he steals something? This is a liability. Carla's posture stiffened. He's not a random drifter, she replied. He's a human being, and I'm taking responsibility for him as my guest. If you have a problem with it, you can talk to management. Adam watched the exchange, torn between gratitude for Carla's defense and humiliation at Derek's words. He found himself stepping forward, voice soft but firm. I'll go if it's causing trouble. He gathered the sandwich and coffee, ready to slip away. Derek turned his piercing gaze on Adam. You should just go, he snapped. We don't need your kind lingering around. Carla interposed herself. Derek, that's enough, she said sharply. Then she turned to Adam. Adam, you're not causing trouble. Please, stay if you want to finish your meal. She glared at Derek, silently daring him to press the matter. For a tense moment, Derek and Carla locked eyes. Then Derek rolled his shoulders back, pivoted, and stormed out. Adam exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I'm sorry," Carla said once again. "He's had a chip on his shoulder lately. Honestly, it's no excuse for his behavior." Adam nodded his thanks, but decided perhaps it was best to go. He took a final sip of coffee, then carefully wrapped the remainder of the sandwich to carry with him for later. "Thank you for your kindness," he said, meeting Carla's eyes. "I won't forget it." Then, with an apologetic shrug, he slipped out of the break area and found himself back in the bustle of the store. He left through the main entrance this time. A few customers cast him curious glances, but no one intervened. Back out in the cold, he stood on the curb, uncertain of his next move. The truth was, Adam had nowhere pressing to be. He often spent his days drifting from place to place, park benches, library reading rooms, a homeless shelter if it wasn't too crowded. He carefully tucked the sandwich inside a plastic bag and put it in his coat pocket, mindful not to crush it. At least he'd have food for later. The sky above remained a dull gray, promising an even colder evening. Adam sighed, considering whether to head to the library for warmth until closing time. As he started walking, a small shiver ran down his spine. He thought about Derek's hostility. Something in those eyes had seemed personal, as though Derek's anger came from more than just Adam's inability to pay. But Adam brushed the thought aside. People's prejudices about homelessness often ran deep. He'd learned it was rarely about him. It was about their own fears, judgments, or resentments. That afternoon, Adam found refuge in the public library, reading old newspapers and browsing job listings on one of the shared computers. He did this often. Though his prospects for a traditional job were slim, he had no permanent address and limited resources. He still scanned the listings. He typed out short notes of places he might inquire about. With winter tightening its grip, he worried about long nights on the street. If he could just secure part-time work, maybe he could afford a cheap room somewhere. Evening settled in, and the library lights flickered in a warning that they would soon close. Adam gathered his belongings, what little he had, and left. The wind stung, and he pulled his coat tighter. Several blocks away was a small encampment under a highway overpass, where he sometimes spent the night with others in similar circumstances. It was never completely safe, but at least he wouldn't be alone in the freezing dark. He walked toward it, footsteps heavy on the cracked sidewalks. The city around him glowed with holiday lights in shop windows, a jarring contrast to the bleakness of his own situation. He reached the overpass, where the muffled roar of traffic overhead blended with the distant hum of passing trains. Shadows shifted under the glow of a single street lamp. A few people milled about, wrapped in blankets or rummaging through battered backpacks. Adam recognized a man named Rico, who gave him a curt nod, and a woman named Sarah, who offered a tired smile. He greeted them softly, then found a spot near a concrete pillar where he spread out a piece of cardboard to sit on. His mind was restless, replaying the day's events. He unwrapped the remaining half of the sandwich, picking at it in the pale light. Though he was grateful for Carla's gesture, he couldn't shake a growing sense of shame. Derek's humiliating treatment had stirred up old feelings: worthlessness, frustration, anger. What if that truly was how the world saw him? A nuisance, a beggar, someone to be dismissed with a scornful remark. He knew he carried more within him than the ragged exterior suggested, but who else would see it? That question trailed him into uneasy sleep, his back pressed against cold concrete, the sky overhead a silent reminder of how alone he felt. The next morning, Adam's body ached from the hard ground. He awoke to the sound of honking cars and the chill of dawn. The half-lights seeped through the gaps in the overpass, painting everything in muted blues and grays. His breath fogged in front of him as he stretched stiff limbs. Others around him were also stirring, shifting blankets, coughing, some preparing to move on. Adam rummaged through his pockets, counting his remaining coins again. He had exactly $5.50, the same amount that had gotten him humiliated the day before. He decided to venture back to Collier's grocer. Not for food this time. He didn't want to risk another confrontation with Derek. But he remembered that Carla had said if he needed anything, he could come by. Maybe he could offer to do small tasks, stock shelves or sweep floors, for a little pay. It was a long shot, but he had to try. Pride alone wouldn't feed him. And though her generosity the day before had been spontaneous, maybe she would see the willingness in him to work for what he needed. When he arrived, the store had just opened. A few elderly customers were inside, moving slowly through the aisles. Adam glimpsed Derek behind the main register, scanning items and speaking politely to a woman who was buying produce. The flash of resentment he felt was immediate. But Adam reminded himself that Derek was just one individual. Maybe Carla would help. He slipped around to the side entrance near the loading dock, out of Derek's line of sight. He found Carla stocking a cooler full of milk cartons. Her face lit up in surprise when she saw him. "Adam," she greeted. "Good morning. How are you holding up?" "Morning," he replied, offering a tentative smile. "I'm doing okay. I was wondering if there was anything I could do around the store for a little pay. Stock shelves, clean up anything." Carla paused, looking torn. "I wish I could say yes, but I have to follow company policy. We can't hire anyone off the books, and full-time or part-time positions require an application process." She sighed. "We might have some seasonal openings, but you'd need an address, references. It's complicated." Adam's shoulders sagged. A swirl of disappointment and resignation pooled in his chest. Still, he forced a small smile. "It's all right. I understand. Thanks for hearing me out." She touched his arm gently. "Wait. I might have something for you, just not through official channels." Looking around to ensure no one was nearby, Carla dropped her voice. "We've been trying to organize these weekly produce donations for the local shelter. Normally, I handle it, but I'm stretched thin. If you help me with sorting and delivering it, I can at least give you some groceries or a small stipend out of my own pocket." Adam's eyes flickered with hope. "That would mean a lot," he said quietly. "I'd be happy to do it." She nodded. "Okay, let me finish stocking here. Then we can go see what's in the back. We'll need to pack up produce that's nearing expiration, but still good to eat, and then drive it over to St. Jude's shelter." A faint warmth spread through Adam's chest. This might not be a formal job, but it was something. A chance to be useful again, to help others, and maybe to earn a bit of money or at least some food for himself. He thanked Carla, then waited in a corner of the storeroom, trying not to be in anyone's way. He spotted Derek at one point, walking past the open doorway, a scowl permanently etched on his features. Adam quickly ducked behind a row of boxes, not wanting another confrontation. Once Carla finished her initial tasks, she guided Adam to a section of the storeroom where cardboard boxes full of produce sat. She handed him gloves and explained what to look for: bruised apples that were still edible, slightly wilted lettuce that could be revived with a rinse, tomatoes just past their ideal aesthetic, but still fine for cooking. Together, they filled boxes with items that wouldn't last on the shelves, but could still provide meals for those at the shelter. The work was surprisingly soothing. Adam found that focusing on each piece of produce distracted him from the swirling anxieties that usually inhabited his mind. Carla chatted with him intermittently, asking about his background, about the changes in the store. He responded briefly, carefully skirting the more painful details. Still, he found her easy to talk to, as though she truly cared about what he had to say. Eventually, they loaded the boxes into Carla's aging sedan. She drove them to St. Jude's shelter, a squat brick building with a faded sign, nestled between two large warehouses. The staff there greeted Carla warmly, taking the produce with gratitude. Adam noticed how the staff and residents exchanged genuine smiles, an undercurrent of community that gave him a spark of hope. This was how people should treat each other, he thought, like human beings, each with a story and a need for kindness. After unloading, Carla slipped Adam a small envelope. "It's not much," she said. "Just a little something for your help. I also grabbed some packaged snacks for you from the break room. Hope that's okay." Adam opened the envelope to find a few bills, maybe $10 or $15 in total. It was more money than he'd held in a while. His eyes stung with gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. This will help more than you know." Carla smiled, her voice gentle. "I'm glad. And Adam, we could use more help next week if you're available. The store restocks produce on Tuesdays, so by Friday or Saturday, we usually have more to donate." He nodded, a knot of emotion forming in his throat. "I'll definitely come by. Thank you, Carla." They said their goodbyes, and Carla drove off. Adam lingered outside St. Jude's shelter for a moment, watching people come and go. The place was busy, with volunteers directing new arrivals, a group of kids playing under a volunteer supervision, and older individuals resting on benches. Adam realized that if he didn't have the mental barriers he did, his pride and his fear of crowded shelters, he might have sought refuge here. But the thought of sleeping around so many strangers still made him uneasy, and the shelter was often full. Perhaps he'd look into it another time, especially as winter grew harsher. For now, he decided to return to his usual spot under the overpass, but not before stopping by a small corner bakery. He used some of Carla's money to buy a hot bowl of soup and a slice of bread, plus a small pastry for later. As he ate, he felt the chill receding a bit, not just from the hot meal, but from the knowledge that someone had shown him compassion. Someone besides the usual handful of other homeless folks who looked out for each other. Days turned into a week, and Adam settled into a routine of sorts. He spent his mornings at the library or doing small errands for acquaintances he'd made around town, like raking leaves for a local widow or helping an older man carry groceries. In return, he might get a few dollars or a warm meal. On Fridays or Saturdays, he would volunteer at Collier's grocer, helping Carla sort produce for St. Jude's. She always slipped him a bit of cash, plus something to eat. Derek still regarded him with open contempt whenever their paths crossed, but Adam did his best to avoid him, focusing on the tasks Carla gave him. During this time, Adam's confidence began to flicker back to life. He remembered how it felt to be useful, to have a sense of purpose. Sometimes he caught a glimpse of his reflection in a store window and saw a man who was carrying himself with slightly straighter shoulders than before. He wasn't proud of his circumstances, but at least he wasn't entirely defined by them. One morning, while Adam was moving boxes in the storeroom, Carla approached him with excitement. I was talking to Mr. Goldman, the general manager. We have a part-time maintenance position opening up soon, mostly cleaning, restocking, small repairs. It's not glamorous, but it's stable hours and includes a modest paycheck." She paused, searching Adam's face. "I'd like to recommend you for it, if you're interested." Adam's heart skipped. A real job? With pay stubs, references, and the possibility of eventually finding a rented room? He felt a wave of gratitude, so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. That sounds amazing," he managed, voice trembling. "Thank you, Carla." A smile lit her features. "It might take a couple of weeks to finalize the details, and you'll have to fill out an application, but I'll help you through it." He nodded, a swirl of hope and anxiety flooding his chest. "I really appreciate that," he whispered. "I won't let you down." The possibility of a job lifted his spirits all day. He carried boxes with renewed energy, tidied the storage area, even cleaned up a spill near the produce section without being asked. As he worked, he spotted Derek walking past with a sour expression. Adam braced himself for a sneer or a rude comment, but Derek just scowled and kept moving. Carla had mentioned that Derek's sales performance was under review, but she didn't go into detail. Adam sensed Derek might be dealing with his own pressures. But given how Derek had treated him, Adam found it hard to muster sympathy. Toward the end of the day, as Adam prepared to leave, Mr. Goldman himself stepped into the back area. He was a stocky man in his early 50s, wearing a button-down shirt and a tie that hung a little crooked. He offered Adam a curt nod. "Carlos told me good things about you," he said, clearing his throat. "I'll keep you in mind for the opening." He extended a business card. "Come see me Monday morning, fill out the paperwork." Adam's voice caught in his throat. He accepted the card as though it were a lifeline. "Thank you," he said. "I'll be here." As he exited the store, hope pulsed in him like a living thing. A part-time job might mean the difference between sleeping under an overpass and finding a modest room to rent, especially if he could supplement that pay with odd jobs. He felt almost lightheaded with the possibility of regaining a foothold in life. But that night, something changed. It was well past sunset when Adam made his way toward the overpass. The cold air was especially biting, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. He passed a darkened storefront, only to sense movement behind him. Instinct kicked in. Living on the streets had taught him to be wary of footsteps that seemed to follow too closely. He turned, catching a glimpse of a figure in a hooded sweatshirt. Before Adam could react, the figure shoved him against the wall, a bony forearm pressed to his throat. A voice hissed, "Your money, hand it over." Alarm flared through Adam, adrenaline spiking. I don't have much," he croaked. He tried to wriggle free, but the figure had him pinned. The smell of stale cigarettes invaded Adam's nostrils. "Don't lie to me," the figure snarled. "I seen you leaving that store with envelopes. Give me what you got." Realization dawned. Someone must have noticed Carlos slipping him a small payment each time. Adam felt a rush of frustration and fear. He forced a hand into his pocket and pulled out the meager bills he had left, maybe $10 total. "That's it," he gasped. "Please, just take it." The figure snatched the money, glancing at it in the dim glow of a distant street lamp. Then he spat a curse. "This all you got?" He let go of Adam's throat, but not before delivering a swift punch to Adam's stomach. White-hot pain shot through Adam's midsection, and he doubled over, gasping. The figure dashed off into the shadows, leaving Adam coughing and trembling on the sidewalk. For a minute or two, Adam stayed hunched over, trying to catch his breath. His body throbbed with pain, and tears of frustration stung his eyes. How had it come to this? Even the small progress he'd made was overshadowed by the constant vulnerability of living on the streets. Eventually, he staggered to his feet, wincing at the ache in his abdomen, and limped toward the overpass. He made it there, found a relatively secluded spot, and curled up, trying to ignore the throbbing pain and the swirl of defeat in his mind. He didn't sleep well, jolting awake whenever the wind gusted or a distant siren wailed. The next morning, he felt stiff and bruised, with a dull ache that made every movement difficult. But he had to keep going. He had to show up at Collier's grocer for the produce run, or for any tasks Carla had for him. He couldn't afford to let this setback derail his fragile progress. To his relief, when he arrived at the store, Carla took one look at his bruised face and hunched posture and led him into the break area. "Oh my God, Adam, what happened?" she whispered, pressing a water bottle into his hand. "I got mugged last night," he admitted, voice strained. "Lost what little money I had." Carla's eyes flashed with concern. "Did you call the police?" He shook his head, looking away. "I have no address, no phone. And they'd probably say it's my word against." He stopped short. The truth was, in his experience, such crimes often went unpunished. He doubted the police would track down a random street mugger over $10. Carla pursed her lips in sympathy. "I'm sorry. Let me see if we have a first aid kit somewhere. We can at least get you some pain relievers." She paused, giving Adam a long look. "Also, maybe we can talk to the local shelter about finding you a better place to stay. It's not safe out there." Adam nodded, though he'd heard it all before. His mind flickered to the job interview with Mr. Goldman. "I'll manage," he said softly. "I just need to get through the next few weeks, then maybe I can find a room somewhere." Carla squeezed his shoulder gently. "All right, but if you need anything, let me know." Don't be too proud to ask. She handed him a couple of over-the-counter painkillers and a glass of water. After he swallowed them, she helped him up. Let's go see what produce we have for St. Jude's. Adam mustered a half smile, grateful for her kindness. Together, they headed into the storeroom to begin the familiar process of sorting through produce. Though his stomach ached each time he bent down, he pushed through, reminding himself that each minute of work was another step toward stability. Once they loaded the boxes, Adam stood by while Carla pulled her car around. As he opened the trunk to place the boxes, a voice cut through the quiet. "What's going on here?" It was Derek, stepping out from the loading bay door, arms folded. His eyes darted between Adam and Carla. "You two sneaking off early again?" Carla blew out an annoyed breath. "We're delivering donations to St. Jude's, as we do every week," she said. The manager approved it. Derek sneered. "Pretty cozy arrangement," he muttered, eyes locking onto Adam. "You get special treatment just because you're homeless? Meanwhile, I actually work here." Carla shot Derek a warning glance. "Stop it. Adam's helping the store and the community by doing this. You know that." Derek let out a dismissive snort, then took a step closer to Adam, eyes brimming with contempt. "Must be nice, scrounging freebies and pity handouts," he said under his breath, though loud enough for Carla and Adam to hear. Adam stiffened, the memory of Derek's humiliating taunts returning. He said nothing, but his fists clenched. Carla turned, voice firm. "Derek, if you have a problem, talk to Mr. Goldman. Otherwise, get back to work." For a moment, Derek looked like he might retort, but then he spun on his heel and stomped back inside. Adam exhaled slowly, trying to calm the trembling in his hands. Carla placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Ignore him," she said. "He's out of line. Let's get this delivered." The two of them got in the car. As Carla drove towards St. Jude's, Adam stared out the window, struggling to process the knot of emotions in his chest. Derek's hostility, the beating he'd endured the night before, and the uncertainty of his future all churned together. But in that tumult, a kind of resilience also took hold. He reminded himself that soon, if all went well, he'd have an official position at Collier's grocer. Derek might sneer, but Adam would earn his paycheck through honest work, no charity, no handouts. He pictured a day when he could stand on his own 2 feet, a place to call his own. That image gave him hope. The following Monday arrived. Adam woke before sunrise, nerves buzzing. It was the day he was supposed to meet Mr. Goldman and fill out the application for the part-time maintenance role. He had managed to clean himself as best he could using a sink in the library's restroom. He wore the least worn-out clothes he had, a pair of faded jeans and a collared shirt missing a button at the cuff. His stomach fluttered with anticipation and dread. Would they overlook his lack of a permanent address? Would they see him as a liability? He reached the store precisely at 9, stepping inside to find Carla behind a service counter. She gave him a warm smile. "Good luck," she mouthed, pointing him toward Mr. Goldman's office in the back. Adam swallowed hard and walked there, heart pounding against his ribs. Mr. Goldman's office was a cramped space piled with boxes of paperwork, promotional materials, and a battered metal filing cabinet. The manager motioned for Adam to sit on a folding chair. So he began looking down at some forms. "Carla vouches for you. Says you're reliable, hardworking. I've seen you help with produce donations. That's good." Adam nodded, hands folded in his lap. "Yes, sir. I can do cleaning, simple repairs, restock items. Whatever's needed." Mr. Goldman flipped through a few pages. "I won't lie to you. Usually, we want references and a current address. But Carla convinced me to be flexible. We'll start you on a probationary basis. If you show up on time and do the work, we'll keep you on. Sound fair?" Relief flooded Adam. "Yes, absolutely. I appreciate the chance." Mr. Goldman handed him several forms. "Fill these out. We'll need some ID for payroll. You do have an ID, right? Adam felt a stab of anxiety. His driver's license had expired, but he still had a state-issued ID card in his coat pocket. He nodded, retrieving it. "It's current," he said, handing it over. "It has an old address, but that's me." Mr. Goldman scanned it, then handed it back. "All right, let's do this." He pointed to a battered desk. "You can fill the forms out there. I'll be back in a minute." Adam exhaled, settling in to fill out the paperwork. When he reached the section asking for an address, he paused. With a tight feeling in his chest, he wrote "no current address." Homeless in small, neat letters. Part of him feared this might disqualify him. But Carla had told him the store could use the business's address for official correspondence until he got on his feet. He pressed on, finishing the forms with meticulous care. Mr. Goldman returned, collected the paperwork, and gave Adam a work schedule. "We're short-staffed on Wednesdays and Thursdays, plus we could use an extra hand on weekends. It'll be around 20 hours a week to start at minimum wage." Adam accepted the schedule, relief saturating his voice. "Thank you, Mr. Goldman. You won't regret this." The manager nodded. "Report to Carla on your first shift. She'll show you the ropes." Adam left the office with a sense of cautious optimism. He spotted Carla near the bakery section. When she saw him, a grin spread across her face. She hurried over. "Looks like you got the job, huh?" He nodded, unable to contain his smile. "Yeah, it's part-time, but it's something real. Thank you, Carla. I couldn't have done this without you." She shook her head. "You did it by working hard and showing us who you are." Then, lowering her voice, she added, "Don't let Derek bother you. He's been extra sour lately, maybe because he sees management is noticing your work. But ignore him. Focus on your tasks." Adam's smile faltered slightly. The idea of being around Derek more often made him uneasy, but he reminded himself this was a big step forward. "I'll manage," he promised. "I won't give him a reason to complain." That day, Adam walked out of Collier's grocer as an employee, a probationary one, but still, he felt a spark of pride, tempered by the knowledge that living on the streets might still pose challenges to punctuality, hygiene, and storing his uniform, which the store would provide. But for the first time in a long while, he saw a tangible path out of homelessness. Adam's first few shifts went relatively smoothly. He swept floors, cleaned restrooms, took out the trash, and helped restock shelves. Customers sometimes gave him odd looks when they recognized him from his ragged appearances outside. But wearing the store's uniform shirt, albeit a size too large, helped him blend in. Carla guided him patiently, showing him how to sign in, where to find supplies, and how to handle basic customer inquiries. Derek, however, made little effort to hide his disdain. He seemed to go out of his way to drop snide comments near Adam, complaining about how management was handing out jobs to anybody, and how some people don't deserve second chances. Adam bit his tongue, focusing on his tasks. He reasoned that as long as he did his job well, Derek's words would remain just that, empty hostility. Yet Derek's antagonism escalated over time. He'd leave spills in an aisle without reporting them, waiting for Adam to notice. Or he'd forget to restock something, letting management blame Adam if items weren't on the shelves. Adam tried to keep track of these small sabotages, but it was draining. He confided in Carla, who frowned. "I'll talk to Mr. Goldman," she promised. "This has gone on long enough." Then one Friday evening, everything came to a head. The store was unusually busy due to a storm forecast. Customers flooded in, stocking up on essentials. Adam was rushing between the stockroom and aisles, trying to keep up with the demand. Derek was manning the main register, looking harried but also oddly smug. Whenever Adam passed by, Derek would smirk or toss in a sly remark. By 8 o'clock, the line at Derek's register stretched halfway down an aisle. Adam happened to be nearby, wiping up a spill, when an older gentleman with a thick coat and a cane approached the line. The gentleman appeared frail, and Adam instinctively moved closer, worried he might need assistance carrying groceries. The older man placed his few items on Derek's counter: a loaf of bread, some soup cans, a few apples. Derek rang them up swiftly. "That'll be $12.56, he announced. The man handed over a $20 bill. Derek, stress evident in the tight set of his jaw, opened the register. He pulled out the man's change, placed it on the counter, and reached for a receipt. But in his haste, he knocked some coins onto the floor. The older man leaned down to retrieve them, nearly losing his balance. Adam stepped forward, quickly picking the coins up and handing them over. "Here you go, sir," Adam said softly. The man smiled weakly, nodding in thanks. But Derek glared at Adam. "Stay at your station," he hissed, as if Adam had no right to help a customer. Adam bit his lip, stepping aside. He watched as Derek bagged the groceries with visible impatience, practically shoving them toward the older man. The older gentleman fumbled with the bag, the weight of the cans making it difficult for him to hold steady. Adam moved forward again, wanting to help. "May I carry it to your car, sir?" he offered politely. Before the man could reply, Derek snapped, "He's fine." He then turned to the man, voice dripping with false cheer. "Have a nice day." The man gave Derek an uncertain look, but allowed Adam to pick up the bag. "Thank you," he said quietly. Adam escorted him to the entrance, holding open the door against the gust of wind outside. The older gentleman gave him a grateful nod and headed out. Returning to the register area, Adam could feel Derek's glare. Derek marched out from behind the counter the moment the line thinned, cornering Adam by a display of cereal boxes. "Stop trying to show me up," Derek growled, jabbing a finger into Adam's chest. "The customers at this store are my responsibility, not yours. You're just here to mop floors and pick up trash." Adam flinched, but held his ground. "I was only trying to help," he said, voice low. He seemed like he was struggling. Derek snorted. "You think you're a hero now, huh? Little do they know you're just another bum who got a pity job." His eyes flashed. "You know what your problem is? You think you're entitled to kindness, but the world doesn't owe you anything." Adam felt anger flare. "I don't think anyone owes me anything," he said firmly. "But I do think people deserve respect, no matter their situation." Derek let out a derisive laugh. "Spare me the sermon. You're living off scraps and charity. Soon enough, management will see you're not worth the trouble." That was the moment Adam decided he'd had enough. Months of humiliation, the memory of Derek's scornful treatment at the deli counter, the constant belittling, it all surged in him. He drew a steady breath. "I don't want trouble, Derek. I'm here to work. But you can't keep treating people like dirt." Derek shoved Adam in the shoulder, causing Adam to stumble back into the cereal display. Boxes rattled, nearly toppling. Adam caught himself, heart pounding. He could feel eyes on them. Several customers, maybe even staff, were witnessing the confrontation. He could sense Carla somewhere nearby, hurrying toward them. But Derek pressed closer, voice rising. "You think you can tell me how to act? You're nobody," Derek shouted, spittle forming at the corners of his mouth. "I've worked here for years, and you come waltzing in, with no home, no dignity, taking hours away from real employees." Suddenly, a quiet voice interrupted. "That's enough, Derek." It was Carla, stepping between them, her expression blazing with anger. "I'm calling the manager." She turned to Adam, concern etched on her face. "Are you all right?" Adam nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. His hands shook with a mix of rage and humiliation. A small crowd of onlookers formed, uncertain whether to intervene. That was when Derek, breathing heavily, swung around to face them. "What are you looking at?" he snarled at the spectators. "Go back to your shopping." He started toward the manager's office, presumably to justify himself first. But from the corner of the store, Mr. Goldman appeared, his face tight with disapproval. He must have heard the commotion. "Derek, my office." Now he barked. The store fell silent, save for the steady drone of fluorescent lights and the faint buzz of conversation from the far aisles. Adam's heart hammered as he watched Derek reluctantly follow the manager into the back. Carla placed a comforting hand on Adam's arm. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I think it's time we finally resolve this." She escorted Adam to a quieter corner of the store. A few employees approached with concerned looks, but Carla waved them off, indicating Adam needed space. Moments later, Mr. Goldman re-emerged from his office, expression grim. He waved both Carla and Adam over. Inside the cramped office, Derek stood in the corner, arms folded, glaring at Adam with undisguised loathing. "Explain," Mr. Goldman said tersely, looking at Carla first. Carla recounted how she'd heard raised voices, saw Derek push Adam, and witnessed Derek's threatening posture. Adam added quietly that he'd only been trying to help a customer, and Derek had taken offense. Derek cut in multiple times, accusing Adam of overstepping boundaries and interfering with cashier duties. Mr. Goldman listened, nodding curtly. Finally, Mr. Goldman turned to Adam. "Do you have anything else to say?" Adam hesitated, glancing at Derek's sneering face, at Carla's worried eyes, at Mr. Goldman's stern demeanor. Then he remembered the night he was mugged, how vulnerable he felt, how Derek's words rang in his head, maybe scraps from the trash. He felt a surge of resolve. He was tired of being treated as less than human. In a level tone, Adam began, "Yes, actually. Derek's been harassing me since I started here. I tried to ignore it, but it hasn't stopped. And before I was hired, he humiliated me when I didn't have enough money to buy a sandwich, called me worthless, treated me like garbage." He paused, trembling with emotion. "I understand I'm not the typical employee. I'm homeless, but I'm trying to rebuild my life. I come here on time, do my work, and don't ask for handouts. I deserve basic respect. Everyone does." Silence clung to the room. Derek rolled his eyes, but Mr. Goldman's gaze pinned him in place. Carla placed a hand on Adam's shoulder, offering silent support. Then Mr. Goldman inhaled slowly. "Derek, is this true? Have you been harassing Adam because of his situation?" Derek snorted. "I don't see why we need to coddle him. He's not going anywhere in life. He's—" "That's enough." Mr. Goldman's voice cut like a knife. "I've already had complaints from staff about your behavior. We're done here." He shook his head in disgust. "I can't keep someone on the payroll who treats customers and coworkers like that." Shock flashed across Derek's face. "Wait, you're firing me?" Mr. Goldman's expression was unyielding. "Yes, effective immediately. Turn in your name tag and collect your personal items. Security will escort you if necessary." Derek sputtered, eyes darting between Carla, Adam, and the manager. Finally, he tossed his name tag onto the desk with a clatter. "You'll regret this," he hissed. He cast a venomous glare at Adam, then stormed out of the office. A tense hush remained. Carla exhaled, relief evident. She met Mr. Goldman's gaze. "Thank you," she said softly. "We can't have that kind of hostility here." Mr. Goldman nodded, weariness lining his features. "Adam, I'm sorry you had to endure that. For what it's worth, your work has been good. We want you to stay. If you need any more help with your living situation, let me know." He cleared his throat. "Carla, can you cover Derek's shift until we find a replacement? We'll handle the rest." She agreed, and Mr. Goldman left the office, presumably to deal with store logistics. Carla turned to Adam, her expression a mix of sympathy and pride. "You okay?" Adam let out a shaky breath. "Yeah, just didn't expect that." Carla nodded. "Sometimes justice comes swiftly, sometimes not. But you deserve to work here without fear or shame." Adam swallowed. "Thank you," he repeated, voice thick with emotion, "for standing up for me from the beginning." She gave him a small, encouraging smile. "You've stood up for yourself too, Adam. That's the part that really matters." Word spread quickly through the store that Derek had been fired. Some employees seemed relieved, admitting that his temper had made shifts stressful. Others appeared shocked, having never seen the worst side of him. Customers who regularly shopped there simply noticed that the usual cashier was gone, replaced by a new hire or sometimes by Carla herself. For Adam, the days that followed were oddly peaceful. He continued his duties, cleaning, stocking, assisting customers, but without the weight of constant hostility bearing down on him. He still had to deal with the challenges of homelessness, but that overshadowing fear of Derek's contempt was lifted. Carla and Mr. Goldman even hinted they might expand Adam's hours if all went well. One afternoon, about a week after Derek's dismissal, Adam was restocking a shelf of canned soups when he felt a light tap on his shoulder. Turning, he found himself face to face with an older woman wearing a worn coat, looking hesitant. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I'm short a few cents on this can of soup. Could you help me find a cheaper option?" For a moment, Adam's mind flashed back to the day Derek had humiliated him. The parallel situation made his chest tighten. He glanced at the woman's timid eyes, the lines of worry on her face. Without hesitation, Adam pulled a few coins from his pocket. "Here," he said gently. "Take what you need. No one should go without a meal if we can help it." Tears welled in her eyes, and she accepted the coins with trembling gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what to say." Adam gave her a warm smile. "You don't have to say anything. Just take care." He reached for a small plastic bag, placing the can of soup inside for her. She thanked him again and hurried off, leaving Adam with a sense of completion. Somewhere, he imagined Derek's sneer, that suggestion about scraps from the trash. Adam exhaled, letting go of the memory. He had stepped into a role of empathy that Derek had refused to fill. Later that day, Carla caught wind of the small gesture and pulled Adam aside. "That was really kind of you," she said. "Just be careful you're not covering too many shortages out of your own pocket. You need every cent, too." Adam nodded. "I know, but I remember how it felt when I was short a few cents." Carla smiled softly. "Exactly. That's why I think you're going to do well here. You understand the customers, the human side of it." He gave a humble shrug, but inside he felt a stirring of pride. Maybe his experiences, painful as they were, had forged in him a deeper compassion. There was a kind of power in turning suffering into empathy rather than anger. By the end of that month, Adam had established a steady work routine. With each paycheck small as it was, he managed to save enough to rent a room in a modest boarding house on the east side of Greenbridge. It was a tiny space with a narrow bed and a single window, but it meant he no longer had to sleep under the overpass or risk violence on the streets. He'd also started looking into local community programs that might help him rebuild his life further: job training, counseling, maybe even night classes down the line. On a crisp Saturday morning, he arrived at Collier's grocer for his shift. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and the store was buzzing with weekend shoppers. Carla greeted him warmly, handing him a list of tasks. "Think you can handle the produce restock?" she asked. "I'll be here if you need anything." He nodded, rolling up his sleeves. "Absolutely. I've got it covered." As he worked, placing fresh apples and oranges onto display stands, he noticed a familiar figure near the entrance. Derek, the ex-cashier, stood there in plain clothes, staring inside like he was deciding whether to enter. For a moment, Adam's heart gave a jolt. He hadn't seen Derek since the day he was fired. Slowly, Derek stepped into the store, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. He looked tired, unshaven, as though life had dealt him some rough days. Adam felt a swirl of conflicting emotions: nerves, pity, wariness. He didn't know Derek's story, only that the man had harbored a deep resentment. Now, seeing Derek with that haunted look in his eyes, Adam couldn't help but wonder if Derek was in trouble. He watched from a distance as Derek wandered the aisles, picking up a loaf of bread, a small carton of milk, the bare essentials. When Derek reached the register, manned by a new cashier, he pulled out a few bills, only to realize he was short. Adam saw the cashier politely explain the total, and Derek's face fall. Adam found himself stepping forward. He recalled what it felt like to be short just a few cents. He also remembered how Derek had mocked him. Yet something deeper than anger welled up, empathy. Adam approached quietly. "Derek," he said, voice level. Derek turned, eyes widening with recognition. He visibly stiffened, perhaps expecting mockery or revenge. He began, struggling to find words. Adam held up a hand to signal it was okay. "You're short, right?" he said, glancing at the total on the register screen. It was only $1 or so beyond what Derek held. Without waiting for permission, Adam took out a few coins and a single bill from his wallet, money he'd earned from his own shifts, and placed them on the counter. "There. That should cover it." A hush fell over the area, the new cashier eyeing them curiously. Derek stared at the money, then at Adam's face, confusion warring with pride and embarrassment. "Why are you doing this?" he finally muttered. I humiliated you." Adam exhaled a slow breath. "Because I know what it's like to be in your shoes," he said simply. "I won't pretend I forgot what happened, but we all need a little grace sometimes." Tears flickered in Derek's eyes. He swallowed hard, picking up the bag with his groceries. "I thank you," he choked out, voice tight. "I lost my apartment after I lost my job. I'm staying on a friend's couch. This is all I could afford." Adam felt a pang of sympathy. "I've been there," he said softly. "It's not easy, but it can get better." Derek stood there for a moment, grappling with the weight of Adam's kindness. Then he managed a nod, muttered another grateful "thank you," and left the store with his groceries. Adam stood still, heart pounding with a mixture of relief and sadness, hoping that maybe, just maybe, Derek would reflect on this moment and find a change in perspective. Carla appeared at Adam's side, having witnessed the exchange from a distance. "That was generous of you," she said, her voice warm with approval. Adam shrugged, blinking back the emotional haze. "He needed it," he replied softly. "No one deserves to go hungry." A gentle smile touched Carla's lips. She reached out and gave Adam's shoulder a squeeze. In that unspoken gesture, he felt a validation of everything he'd endured and learned. Life could be harsh, but compassion had a power of its own. Compassion could heal, surprise, and reshape people's futures, even if it once came from a place of deep personal pain. When Adam turned back to his work, the overhead lights glinted off the fresh produce, illuminating the aisle in a soft glow. He placed apples carefully in a neat pyramid, remembering how Derek had once taunted him for being nobody. Yet here he stood, not as a nobody, but as someone who had fought his way up from rock bottom with dignity and empathy intact. Over the coming weeks, life found a new rhythm. Adam arrived at the boarding house each evening, letting himself into his tiny room with a sense of relief, an actual bed, a lock on the door, a lamp to read by. In the mornings, he'd walk to Collier's grocer and clock in, performing tasks that ranged from mopping floors to assisting customers with heavy items. Sometimes, he'd even run the register if the new cashier needed a break, showcasing that he was capable of more than menial labor. Carla, for her part, kept championing Adam's growth, telling Mr. Goldman that Adam was a natural with customers. The store continued its produce donations to St. Jude's, and Adam often led the effort, sorting the fruits and vegetables with practiced efficiency. At the shelter, he'd greet people he recognized from his time on the street, offering them a smile, a handshake, sometimes a few words of encouragement. He had walked in their shoes, and they recognized that. A silent understanding passed between them. Life was precarious, but there was still hope. One chilly Saturday, Adam finished his shift and decided to treat himself to a modest lunch at a nearby cafe. As he walked, he felt the crisp air in his lungs and realized how different he felt from that day he had first walked into Collier's grocer, pockets full of coins but short on dignity. Now he stood straighter, looked people in the eye. He had a job, a roof, albeit a small one, over his head. He was no longer merely surviving. He was living. While waiting for a traffic light, he spotted someone familiar across the street. Derek, walking with hunched shoulders, a small backpack slung over one arm. Derek seemed thinner, weighed down by whatever troubles had befallen him. Before Adam could cross, Derek disappeared around a corner. Adam felt a pang of concern. He briefly considered following, but the light changed and crowds surged around him. By the time he reached the opposite sidewalk, Derek was gone. Adam went on to the cafe, sat at a corner table with a cheap sandwich and a cup of coffee. His mind drifted to Derek, to that last encounter where Adam had covered Derek's shortfall. He wondered if Derek had found a new job or if he was struggling in ways no one saw. Life had taught Adam that a single stroke of bad luck or good luck could radically change one's trajectory. Returning to the boarding house, Adam passed a convenience store and noticed a small help-wanted sign in the window. Cashier needed, nights/weekends. He paused, scribbled down the phone number. Maybe Derek could use this lead. Or maybe Adam himself might benefit from an extra shift. But he already had a stable position at Collier's. Perhaps he'd mention it to the next person who asked him about job opportunities, someone at the shelter, maybe. Stepping into his tiny room, Adam set down his things and sank onto the bed. The walls were still bare, but the space felt like his. For the first time in years, he had a place he could call home, however humble. He was safe, warm, and exhausted in that satisfying day's work sense. He glanced to the corner where a small pile of books rested, a few he'd picked up from the library's clearance shelf, determined to expand his horizons. He still harbored dreams. Maybe one day he'd find a better-paying job. Maybe he could save enough to afford a small apartment. Maybe, with time, he could even reconcile the family ties he'd severed when life went off track. So many maybes, but for now that was enough. His mind flicked back to the day Derek had tried to force him out of the store, humiliating him for being 8 cents short. A ghost of that shame tugged at him, but it was quickly replaced by the memory of how Carla had intervened, and how Adam had eventually outlasted Derek's cruelty. A small, wry smile played on his lips. Life could be strangely poetic. The cashier who once humiliated him ended up learning, in a very painful way, that compassion and respect matter. Adam lay back, folding his hands behind his head. He gazed at the ceiling, the hum of the heater filling the silence. He knew his story was far from over. There would be new trials, new setbacks. But he also knew he'd face them with a resilience he hadn't possessed before. He had discovered a secret strength within, one forged by struggle, sustained by empathy, and proven by each day he spent climbing out of the dark place he'd once found himself in. As he drifted off to a light doze, the final thoughts settling in his mind were of gratitude, for Carla's kindness, for Mr. Goldman's willingness to give him a chance, for the knowledge that he could pay forward the compassion he'd received. The once homeless man who had stood humiliated at a deli counter was now an employee who treated customers with dignity. In the end, the real secret he'd pulled out wasn't some hidden fortune or a powerful connection. It was the capacity within himself to keep going, to believe in a better tomorrow, and to share that faith in kindness with those who needed it most.